Comparative education, a historical context. Now let us see how the field of comparative education evolved over time. After the World War II, it was time for the leaders of the world to sit together and think about what to do about this war-ridden world. So education was now being seen as a panacea for all the problems and as a road to development. This was also a time when most of the colonies were now being freed, and you have an era in which there are lots of countries coming up. So there was a mutual understanding that there should be a focus on the development of education. And that is the reason why in 1950s and 60s, we see an emergence of a large number of international bodies that are geared towards peace and development, and their focus is on education. We also see at this time development of lots of societies that have been developed in different countries. Beginning from 1956 in the U.S., the Society of Comparative Education Society, and then gradually leading in 1961 to CESC, again a comparative education society that has its roots in Europe. And in 1970, you have this WCCE, that is a World Congress Comparative Education Societies. So you see over the period of time how people realized that comparative education was a field from which lots of people could learn, and we could learn from different contexts to develop their own education systems. And that is why gradually it started to become a field in its own right. And as soon as WCCES was established, and there was also a plethora of journals that was coming up. And once the journals were there was again a focus on the methodology. And since the policymakers were very much interested in bringing about positive change in their own countries by making comparisons across different cultures, there was an era where there was a critique of the systems or the methodology that had been used in earlier studies. Most of the methodology that was used earlier was historic and descriptive, and now policymakers wanted to move towards a more concrete analysis, a clear-cut quantitative analysis that enabled them to draw conclusions more clearly. So we see over here in this period a shift from descriptive studies to more rigor in methods. So the main critique against this descriptive way in which the comparative education studies were done was that these studies did not actually link up education with society, and neither did they link up education with the markets. So since these policymakers were looking at education as a means for development, they were also focused upon learning these lessons from the comparative studies. So you see over here that there comes a focus on quantitative studies, quantitative comparisons, and you see its implication even in today's world. So you have these human development indicators, you have these education for all indicators. These are all quantitative indicators in which countries are posited against each other to see the level of their education and development. And another major concern at this time for the policymakers was that they wanted actually to delineate or to find out what were the laws. वो कौन से ऐसे laws हैं which are governing the relationship between education and society. So what happens when certain things are there in a given context? Can we sort of predict what will happen if these things will happen in a similar context elsewhere? So these were the lessons that these policymakers wanted to learn.